It would begin as a great forest kingdom, populated with Sylvan elves of ancient days, later joined by Sindar refugees from Beleriand. Later, it would become a dark place, infested with evil creatures after Sauron takes over an elven fortress. Today on Nerd of the Rings, we cover the history of Mirkwood. The first peoples to settle the forest of Mirkwood were some of the Teleri elves. As we discussed in my video on the many clans of the elves, one of the groups of the Teleri were the Nandor, and of the Nandor, there is a group that comes to be known as the Sylvan Elves. It is these Sylvan Elves who abandoned the Great Migration in the Vales of Anduin, west of the Misty Mountains. With their kin moving on toward Beleriand, the Sylvan Elves settle in the woodlands to their east, and while this would eventually be known as Mirkwood, for the greatest part of its existence, this forest is known as Greenwood the Great. Over time, the Sylvan Elves are joined by some of the wandering Avari, those elves who refused to join the Great Journey from its very beginning. But it would not only be the Sylvan Elves, also known as Wood Elves, that would step foot in Greenwood. The dwarves of Khazad-dûm would travel through Greenwood in order to go back and forth to their realm of the Iron Hills in the east. Accomplished roadmakers, they would build a path that goes through the forest. For many long years, it would be known as the Great Dwarf Road. We would know very little of what transpired in Greenwood over the course of the First and early Second Ages. It would be 750 years into the Second Age when this realm would become a kingdom. Around the same time that the Noldor under Celebrimbor established the realm of Eregion, a group of Sindarin elves led by Oropher goes even further east to Greenwood. There, the Sindarin elves would merge with the Sylvan elves, and they would take Oropher as their king, thus establishing the Kingdom of the Woodland Realm. Among the Sindar to accompany Oropher is his son, Thranduil. Unlike the grand kingdoms and fortresses of the First Age elves, and especially those common with the Noldor, Oropher seeks to embrace the simple, natural existence of the elves prior to the Great Journey. He and his people adopt the customs and language of the Sylvan Elves, as evidenced in the name of Thranduil's eventual son, Legolas, a Sylvan Elvish name. Initially, the Woodland Realm would be focused in the south of Greenwood. Oropher and his people would focus their dwellings around the hill of Amon Lank. This location, translated as the Naked Hill, was the highest point in this area of the forest, and got its name because no trees grew upon the hill itself. Notably, the Sylvan Elves would also dwell in the forest of Lorien, across the great river Anduin. These elves would be under the rule of another Sindarin elf, King Amroth. However, the actions of Sauron would disrupt the peoples of Greenwood the Great from as early as the Second Age. By 1697, Sauron has destroyed Eregion in his quest to reclaim all the Rings of Power. As he sets his sight on the elves of Lindon, and causing mass destruction in Eriador, he tasks the orcs with disrupting the dwarves wherever they could be found. This leads directly to the sack of Gundabad, the ancient awakening place of Durin I, and frequent meeting place for the dwarves. The sack of Gundabad leads to the dwarves abandoning the Great Dwarf Road, and communication between Khazad-dûm and the Iron Hills is cut off by the orcs. This would no doubt lead to the decrepit state the road is found in thousands of years later during Bilbo's adventure, when it is simply known as the Old Forest Road. The elves, meanwhile, would move the Woodland Realm 3 times throughout its history. The first time, we are told, comes not as a result of Sauron, but of dwarves and another group of elves. Oropher moves his people north beyond the Gladden Fields to be free from the power and encroachments of the dwarves of Marya. Also, he is said to have resented the intrusions of Galadriel and Celeborn into Lorien. Oropher would move his people once again as the Second Age progresses. Concerned by reports of Sauron's growing power, the woodland realm would be centered around the western glens of the Eminduir by the end of the Second Age. Notably, it is said his numerous people would live and roam in the woods and vales westward as far as Anduin and north of the ancient Dwarf Road. While Oropher and his Sylvan Elves would seek to stay out of the affairs of the Noldor and Sindar, not to mention those of dwarves, men, and orcs, Oropher was wise enough to foresee that true peace could not come to Middle-earth unless Sauron was overcome. So when Gil-galad and Elendil form the last alliance of elves and men, Oropher assembles a great army of his own to join the fight. We were told they were, by now, a numerous people. After all, the Sylvan Elves have, as of yet, not been involved in any large-scale conflicts, unlike the Noldor and Sindar. While they are hardy and valiant in fighting alongside the host of Gil-galad, we are told their armor and weapons paled in comparison to the Eldar of the West. This, combined with their hesitancy to take orders from Gil-galad, leads to terrible losses of Sylvan Elves in the War of the Last Alliance. Oropher himself is among the slain, and his son Thranduil is left to lead the survivors back to Greenwood. There he is crowned as the new king of the Woodland Realm. In one of his earliest recorded acts as king, Thranduil would learn of a group from Gondor being attacked by orcs near the Gladden Fields in the second year of the Third Age. This is first noticed by the Woodmen, men who lived in the forest of Greenwood and were on friendly terms with the elves. While messengers were sent to Thranduil, the Woodmen themselves sent a force to attack the orcs and aid the Dunedain. Sadly, they are too late. Isildur and nearly all his company have been killed, and unknown to nearly all, the One Ring is lost to the river Anduin. The Woodmen would only be able to drive away the orcs and prevent the mutilation of the bodies of the fallen men. Other than 2 men sent away with the shards of Narsil, there would be only one other survivor, a man discovered by the Woodmen who had been knocked unconscious with a club and found under the body of Isildur's son. It is from this man, Estelmo, that we learn the final words between Isildur and his son Elendur. Thranduil would continue to rule the Woodland Realm during a period of roughly 1100 years of peace that follows Sauron's defeat. However, around the 1100th year of the Third Age, Sauron's evil would come directly to Greenwood. Known at this time as the Necromancer, Sauron takes over the abandoned fortress of Amon Lanc, which comes to be known as Dol Guldur, the Hill of Sorcery. Sauron's evil would spread over Mirkwood, and as a result, Thranduil would once again relocate his people, settling in the northeast of the forest, just north of the Forest River. There the elves would build the Elvenking's Halls, a stronghold consisting of a system of caves, reminiscent of the great halls of Thingol, king of Doriath. Meanwhile, the shadow of Sauron's influence spreads throughout the forest, leading it to be known in Sindarin as Tar Nufuin, which translates to forest under nightshade. This is the same name used to describe the forests of Dorthonion in the First Age, when Sauron's evil influence would infect those lands. But for this Third Age forest, it would commonly be known by the Mannish translation, Mirkwood. By 1636, a great plague kills countless people in Rhovanion, Gondor, and Eriador, coinciding with the evil of Sauron spreading in Mirkwood. And as the text says, many evil things reappeared, which were signs of Sauron's rise. Among these things is no doubt creatures like orcs and trolls, but also spiders. The spiders of Mirkwood were the children of Shelob, originating in the Ethel Duath and spreading to places like Dol Guldur and the surrounding forest. Fortunately, there would be a respite from Sauron in store for Mirkwood. In 2063, Gandalf the Grey goes to Dol Guldur to investigate this necromancer, whom the wise originally believed to be one of the Nazgul. Not yet ready to reveal himself, Sauron flees, and for nearly 400 years, there would be a watchful peace in the Westlands of Middle-earth. Yet Sauron would return to Mirkwood with renewed strength in 2460, and from Dol Guldur, he would orchestrate the orcs spreading throughout the Misty Mountains, blocking routes to the west as well as taking up residence in Marya. Contributing to the dark outlook for this area of Middle-earth during this time is the arrival of the dragon Smaug, who sacks the dwarven kingdom of Erebor in 2770. 75 years later, King Thrain II, father of Thorin Oakenshield, would travel from their new home in the Blue Mountains and brave the crossing of the Misty Mountains and the lands of Mirkwood. As his company camps under the eaves of Mirkwood, Thrain disappears and would never again be seen by his people. In 2850, Gandalf once again enters Dol Guldur. This time he is undetected and discovers that the necromancer is indeed Sauron. There he also discovers a captured dwarf who gives him a key. The dwarf is in such a decrepit state that he does not know his own name. Gandalf would later come to realize that this dwarf was King Thrain, and the key was to the secret door of Erebor. Prior to Gandalf's arrival, Sauron had tortured Thrain and taken back the dwarven ring of power he possessed. Gandalf's discovery of Thrain would, in part, bring about one of the most famous journeys through Mirkwood in history. And in 2941 of the Third Age, the company of Thorin Oakenshield would enter its borders. One of the first encounters they have is with one of Mirkwood's most unique residents, Beorn the Skin Changer. Bilbo and the rest of the company would stay in Beorn's home from July 20th to July 22nd. The great man, who is capable of transforming into a mighty bear, would aid the company by lending them ponies. He also gave them guidance on their path through Mirkwood. Their intended path had been the Men Inaugrim, the Old Dwarf Road. However, Beorn would inform them that the road was in disrepair and that the entrance was often used by goblins. Instead, he says they should go by the elf path. The company takes the elf road through the darkening forest, seeing cobwebs on either side. About halfway through this path, the company encounters a unique and perilous feature of northern Mirkwood, the Enchanted River. The water is black, and anyone who touches the water would fall into an enchanted sleep. Fortunately, the company discovers a boat to help them traverse the river. Unfortunately, Bombur, the heaviest of their companions, would fall in and would need to be carried by his companions for several days before he awoke. Prior to entering the forest, Gandalf would depart the company. Unknown to his companions, he would join the other members of the White Council in launching an attack on Dol Guldur. As a result, Sauron would flee to Mordor, and for a time, Dol Guldur would be clear of his influence. Meanwhile, Bilbo and the dwarves would have their first encounter with the elves of the Woodland Realm. 3 times the now foodless company would find this group of elves feasting in the forest. Yet each time the dwarves approached, they would put out their fires and plunge the company into darkness. This trickery causes the dwarves to leave the path, something they had been warned not to do should they wish to successfully complete the journey. Lost and separated, Bilbo and the dwarves would all be attacked by the vile creatures of Shelob's brood, the spiders of Mirkwood. In his cleverness, Bilbo is able to lure the spiders away and rescue the dwarves. Together, the company fends off the spiders when they return. However, they discover Thorin is not among them, having been captured by the elves. Soon afterward, the remaining dwarves are also captured and brought to Thranduil's halls in the north of Mirkwood. Bilbo follows using his magic ring, leaving this dark area of Mirkwood with a new purpose and a new name for his sword, Sting. The dwarves are brought before Thranduil, who questions them about their doings, where they are from, and where they are going. The dwarves are uncooperative.
"What have we done, O king?"
said Balin, who was the eldest left.
"Is it a crime to be lost in the forest? To be hungry and thirsty? To be trapped by spiders? Are the spiders your tame beasts or your pets, if killing them makes you angry?"
Such a question, of course, made the king angrier than ever, and he answered, "It is a crime to wander in my realm without leave. Do you forget that you were in my kingdom, using the road that my people made? Did you not 3 times pursue and trouble my people in the forest, and rouse the spiders with your riot and clamor? After all the disturbance you have made, I have the right to know what brings you here, and if you will not tell me now, I will keep you all in prison until you have learned sense and manners." Over the coming weeks, Bilbo would sneak around the Elvenking's halls, always in hiding and wearing his ring. On occasion, he would sneak out when the Wood Elves, sometimes with Thranduil at the lead, would go out on a hunt or other business. However, it was risky, as he would nearly be caught in the doors as they shut. Not to mention, once shut, the doors were sealed with magic. For nearly a month, Bilbo would sneak his way throughout the elven dwelling, eventually finding the cells of all the dwarves, including Thorin. Bilbo then discovers a new way out of Thranduil's halls, and orchestrates their grand escape via empty wine barrels. After the prison break, Thranduil receives word from the elves who transported barrels upstream, and he is able to deduce the dwarves' mission. In response, Thranduil says to himself, "Very well, we'll see. No treasure will come back through Mirkwood without my having something to say in the matter, but I expect they will all come to a bad end, and serve them right." The company would not come to a bad end. Instead, Thranduil learns of Smaug's demise. Being well aware of the treasure hoard within the mountain, but unaware of the dwarves' survival, Thranduil sets out to claim a share of the treasure. After giving aid to the men of Laketown, Thranduil and Bard the Bowman lead their forces to Erebor, where they realize the dwarves had indeed survived. As we've covered in previous videos, there is strife between the men and elves and dwarves. Their differences are set aside with the arrival of an orc army under Bolg, and the battle of 5 armies ensues. Though victorious, we are told many wood elves were slain in the conflict. It seems they would be avenged, as many of the surviving orcs flee into the Great Forest, where they are either slain by elves or drawn in to die deep in the trackless dark of Mirkwood. While Thranduil would lay the elven blade Orcrist upon Thorin's tomb, he would take back to the woodland realm the necklace of Girion, a great piece of jewelry adorned with emeralds, a gift from Bard. With the necromancer driven from Dol Guldur, Mirkwood has a brief respite. But like all Middle-earth, it would feel the effects as the War of the Ring draws near. Just 2 years after Bilbo's adventure, Gollum would travel through Mirkwood searching for this supposed thief. While he is not captured by the elves, his presence would haunt the woodmen, who whispered of a ghost that drank blood and would creep into windows to find cradles. Then, in 2951, just 10 years after he was driven from Dol Guldur, Sauron would send Khamûl the Easterling, second greatest of the Nazgûl, along with 2 other ringwraiths to reoccupy the old fortress. For decades, they would operate in the south as the elves remained in the north, seemingly at a stalemate as the shadow grows in Middle-earth. On March 21st, 3018, Thranduil would receive a visitor and a captive. Aragorn arrives having traveled 900 miles from the Dead Marshes, with Gollum in tow. Along the way, he had been aided by the Beornings, the men of Mirkwood who had followed Beorn, and by this later time, his son, Grimbeorn. 2 days after Aragorn's arrival, Gandalf comes to Mirkwood and begins to interrogate Gollum for information about his ring and his actions. After a week in the Elven realm, Gandalf would leave, heading back to the Shire in order to send Frodo on his quest. Over the coming months, Thranduil's people would be charged with keeping Gollum prisoner. During his captivity, they would occasionally take him outside the Elvenking's halls and allow him to climb trees. One day, 3 months after Gollum's arrival, orcs attack the Wood Elves, allowing Gollum to escape. Realizing others must be informed, Thranduil sends his son Legolas to Rivendell with the message. There he would take part in the Council of Elrond and join the Fellowship of the Ring. As this prince of the Woodland Realm embarks on the Great Quest, his homeland would come under a renewed threat from Dol Guldur. Our first clue actually comes from Frodo Baggins. When the Fellowship comes to Amon Hen, and Frodo sits upon the Seat of Seeing, he is able to see far across Middle-earth, and we are told, under the boughs of Mirkwood there was deadly strife of elves and men and fell beasts. The land of the Beornings was aflame, a cloud was over Marya, smoke rose on the borders of Lorien. While this is the only mention of such a conflict on February 26, 3019, there would be plenty more in the days to come. In 3 separate attacks on March 11th, 15th, and 22nd, orcs from Dol Guldur would cross the river Anduin and attack the realm of Lorien. Each time they are repelled by the elven warriors and the power of Galadriel and her ring. Coinciding with the second of these attacks is an attack on Thranduil's realm, also originating from Dol Guldur. This battle under the trees of Mirkwood would result in great fire damage to the forest. Yet in the end, Thranduil and his people would prove victorious. 6 days after the attack on the Woodland Realm, and 3 days after Sauron's downfall, Galadriel and Celeborn would launch an attack upon Dol Guldur. The Galathrim are successful, and this dark fortress, the greatest remnant of Sauron in Mirkwood, is thrown down by Galadriel's hand. 8 days later, on April 6, 3019, Thranduil and Celeborn would meet in the middle of Mirkwood. There they divide the Great Forest, now free of Sauron's influence. Celeborn takes the southern portion, making it East Lorien. Thranduil takes the portion north of the Emenduir. As for the central portion, it is given to the Beornings and Woodmen, who had for so long lived in friendship with them and also fought the forces of evil. To the forest as a whole, they would give a new name, reminiscent of its old one, Erin Las Gallen, meaning Wood of Green Leaves. 20 years into the Fourth Age, Legolas would lead a group of elves out of his father's kingdom. By the leave of King Aragorn, they would set up a dwelling in the lands of Ithilien, making it the fairest country in all the Westlands. These elves were said to have lived in Ithilien for the next 100 years, and alongside dwarves led by Gimli, they would help restore Minas Tirith. As for Thranduil, we are told nothing of this elven king after his meeting with Celeborn. While some may envision him eventually taking one of the last ships into the west, it's also possible that he would live on in the Greenwood, ruling the sylvan elves of the forest in his underground halls of the Woodland Realm until the utmost fading of their kind. As always, I want to say a huge thank you to all my Patreon and YouTube supporters who make this channel possible. Tom DeBombadil 19, Lissamy the Cinda, Rabbi Rob Thomas, Charles Leisure, CCDC Red Team, Joe Tepper, The Mighty Mim, Andrew Carlisle, Swirled Traveler, Matthew Jeffrey, Viking Lord, Alvin Einbert, Jeremy Daniel Derby, Madame Director, Leo Vittori, Sky Carcass, Slide Belts, Dane Ragnarsson, Berto Berg, Graham Derricott, The Dark-Haired One, Wyland, Z and N, Evely, Micah Wu, and Debbie. If you enjoyed the artwork in this video, check out the artists in the description to purchase prints of their great work for yourself. Next time on Nerd of the Rings.